Joe Biden offered Vladimir Putin 20% of Ukraine to end war, report. CIA Director William Burns has reportedly told Russian President Vladimir Putin, as part of a peace plan drawn up for President Joe Biden, to give 1/5 of Ukraine's territory to end the war. Provided in order to. Barnes reportedly submitted in mid-January his plan to end the war that began on February 24, 2022. The Swiss-German newspaper NZZ reported on Thursday, citing a senior German politician abroad. Both Kiev and Moscow reportedly rejected the proposal. According to the newspaper, the proposal would provide about 20% of Ukraine's territory, roughly the size of the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine. Kiev reportedly closed the proposal because they don't want to divide the territory, but Russian officials said, in any case it will win the war in the long run. Said. Newsweek has contacted the Biden administration and the foreign ministries of Ukraine and Russia for comment. U.S. must support Ukraine's NATO membership in 2023. European delegation says factions in the country are lobbying for Ukraine to use the conference to begin the official process for joining the Western Military Initiative Alliance. 2019, Lithuanian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Žygimantas Pavilionis said at a roundtable with journalists in Washington on Wednesday. We stand for freedom, democracy, and the victory of the Ukrainian people and have cross-party unity because of our values. We have the enormous strategic power of Europeans who have recognized American leadership. Pavilionis traveled as part of a joint delegation including his foreign policy officers to the Polish and Ukrainian parliaments. They toured think tanks in Washington and Capitol Hill this week, discussing why the Biden administration and lawmakers should continue to generously fund security aid to Ukraine. And perhaps the most politically sensitive person? Ukrainian, Lithuanian, and Polish lawmakers have called on Washington to ignore the deep-seated fears of the American public over direct armed conflict with Russia and to undertake Ukraine's NATO membership this year. We want to do this to convey to our American partners the idea that Ukraine's membership of NATO is inevitable in the future, said Radoslaw Vogier, head of the Polish Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. In Europe, we understand that it is a matter of when and how we do it. It's part of our job. A U.S. president's approval of Ukraine's membership would give significant weight to their ambitions, and the Senate would have to approve Ukraine's entry into the military alliance. Results of a January poll released Tuesday by the Pew Research Center showed a widening partisan divide over how Americans view aid to Ukraine. About 40% of Republican voters believe the U.S. is providing too much aid to Ukraine, up from 32% in September. Meanwhile, Democrat support for keeping aid to Ukraine at its current level fell by 5 percentage points to 40%, with 15% of those who said it was too high, up from 11% since the fall. However, 23% of Democrats want more support for Ukraine, up from 20% in September. Recognizing this decline in U.S. political support, Eastern European lawmakers said they were looking to 2023 as the year in which an invitation to join NATO would be set for Ukraine, because it will likely be consumed in the next presidential election. And if a Republican is elected to succeed President Joe Biden, there is a real chance that he will end or drastically cut defense aid to Ukraine. For example, former President Donald Trump, who is seeking the Republican presidential nomination, has advocated reducing American support. Our goal is simple: to liberate the entire territory, including Crimea, from Russian occupation and join NATO as soon as possible, because NATO is the only and best security guarantee in the world today. Ukrainian Commission on Foreign Policy and Interparliamentary Cooperation. Merezhko argued that Russian President Vladimir Putin is essentially a bully who will pick fights with those he sees as weaker, but would withdraw from Ukraine if threatened with war by the full might of the 30-member NATO alliance. That Putin hasn't moved against either Finland or Sweden since the two Nordic countries announced their plans to join NATO last summer is evidence he is not suicidal, the Ukrainian lawmaker said. If Ukraine becomes, right now, a member of NATO, it will stop Putin's war, Merezhko said. Never surrender. But if the current trajectory of US and European support is maintained, enabling Ukraine to continue fighting, but not to decisively push Russia out of all captured Ukrainian territory, including the Crimean Peninsula, then the United States could be looking at a proxy military quagmire, Pavilianese said. Are we ready for victory, or are we turning Ukraine into Afghanistan again, where we have no strategy and know how it ended? He asked. Since Ukrainians will never surrender and we, Lithuania, will never surrender, there is potential for development from there. If nothing is done, if we continue with this current policy, Vilnius will be Bucha in 6 to 7 years. They occupied the place last year. At last week's Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing on Russia, Chairman Bob Menendez, Democrat, New Jersey, called on the Biden administration to impose strong sanctions on Chinese companies that sell dual-use technology to Russia. Asked, "We shouldn't leave the missile capabilities to them," he said. Senator Jim Lish of Idaho, a senior Republican on the panel, added, "China appears to be acting with impunity and sanctions against this really need to be toughened." Both states are scheduled to meet with Eastern European delegations this week.